So the diaspora wars are interesting, right? Because you hear African versus African American, Caribbean people.
Okay, so this is Cipher.j. This is somebody that I found out about when somebody put like their account into one of my comments, right, into one of my videos. And so I've seen the videos before on YouTube and I thought they were interesting. I just didn't know the account name, right, because I'm not good with names. And I looked at some of his videos, and he has a lot of great deep dives into different things, with history, different types of ways that he looks at philosophy, and so many other stuff that honestly, sometimes I understand, sometimes I'm just like, I'm along for the ride. But I love his passion for getting people to think and the different things that he does intellectually, right? Okay, so that's the positive. Here's the problem. I really get annoyed when we have these conversations about the diaspora wars, and some of the comments within that video are people being like, yeah, it's stupid, we're all black, we need to stop making black culture just American. Here is the issue. Back in the day, 1930s, 1940s, and on, right, during that era, um, you could be from anywhere, but you were black, right? You could be from Africa, you were black. You could be from, somewhere in Spain, whatever, but you're black. Literally, as long as you have that black skin, somebody in your family is black, you are black. Things have changed. And so I'm not saying that Africans have never been considered black or people who are not just African American or Black American, that they weren't considered being black. No, that has always been the thing, right? But when we are now having more conversation about cultural differences, and when we're now having more conversation about race classification, the problem that I have with this whole thing where people are going around saying, "Oh yeah, but you guys do not get to claim black. Black culture is not just Black American culture." This type of thinking leads to black people in the UK saying that they also have soul food, that we don't just have soul food. Africans going around claiming the different types of music that we make, right? Claiming that our hairstyle, since it derives from them, it's a deviation of their culture, it's basically their culture, right? We don't get to own anything. We don't get to have any ownership. We do not get to claim anything within our culture, within the things that we created in the United States of America. And this is my problem. The difference is that Africans get to claim African identity because they grew up, they live, and they have connection in that African country, in the continent of Africa. They have the ability to claim that is theirs. Even Jamaicans and other, I call them island blacks. I don't say that's a slur, but even they have the ability to claim it. And technically, they just got off an earlier time than we did, and they decided to set up shop on the islands. That's me paraphrasing, right? And so they are connected with their African, culture. They do claim that in a way. However, at the end of the day, they still had to recreate something. They still had to create something else that was their own. And nobody is sitting there batting an eye about them sitting there being, a lost people. I guess because they still mimic some of the aspects of African culture. But the problem with that with Black Americans is that even if we have done that, even if we did acknowledge some of our African roots, it would still be, something used against us because we're not doing it right. We're not being authentically African, or we're being too American, or this is a misinterpretation of the real Africans. How ignorant, how sad, how silly. And so there is no wiggle room to be able to authenticate someone's culture when you are somebody in the United States of America as a Black American, right? And so when talking about black culture, I just get really annoyed when there's Africans being like, we deserve to be under the label of black culture just based off of the fact that we are black. Not understanding that because of the way that the culture was formed, you should not be able to sit there and say that you're part of black culture when you do not fully live and embody blackness. You do not fully live and embody that racial classification. You do not live in a country that constantly puts that as a focal point of who you are and what you represent and how much you're worth. You are somebody who gets to go beyond the racial classification, something that a lot of Africans have told Black Americans throughout the years. You are somebody who's Nigerian, Kenyan, West African, South African, whatever it is, right? You are beyond something that is just the racial classification. This is something that Africans have acknowledged. This is something that Africans have said makes them better than Black Americans. And so when Black Americans then look and somebody sitting there from Africa, or somebody sitting there, African from the UK, or somebody's even Jamaican, and we're kikiing, we're at the cookout, everything's good, but then they're going around sitting there saying, actually, I'm part of black culture. And then, like I said, when it gets a little too uncomfortable, when it gets a little too bad, when the optics are not looking good and blackness is not in, suddenly you're going back to Jamaica. Suddenly you're going back to the homeland. Suddenly you're going back to this particular tradition. Suddenly, I don't speak that language, I don't do those things, I am a more dignified kind of person. That's just not something that black people can do. Yes, we could sit there and talk about whitewashing. Yes, we could talk about respectability politics. Yes, we could talk about middle class versus hood. Yes, we could sit there and talk about all of those different aspects of, how we create hierarchies and who's better than who in the black American community. But still, we acknowledge that we are black people in America. You cannot sit there and say that America is one of those countries that fixates on race, that makes race its entire issue, its entire identity. The foundation of the country is built off of race classification and making sure that people fixate on race itself. And then sit there and tell the people of that they do not get to claim that when that has been something that has been burdened upon them and their people for generations. It makes no sense. Yes, you are racialized in your country. Yes, you are racialized in other parts of the world. But still, it's just a different dynamic. So trying to come in and say we need to all come together and we need to all to claim black culture, and black culture should not just be black American. Is that because you want to really be in the community? Is that because you really want to expand what the community means? Or do you want to benefit from the fact that that even though people talk about the black identity, even though people look down on the black identity, it is still something that is used and mimicked around the world to make profit, to stand out, to look interesting, right? So let's really be honest about this. Let's really be honest about this.